Hi, my name is Lily and welcome to my channel, and welcome to me reacting to your bookish unpopular opinions. So I made a post over on my Instagram asking for some unpopular bookish opinions, and you guys definitely followed through. If you would like to contribute to these kinds of videos in the future, I would highly recommend following me over on Instagram, because that is usually where I do these shoutouts. Some of these are about specific books, some of them are general bookish ones. I have them all in this trusty jar so that I can pour them out randomly. I have screened them so they're all ones I want to react to, but I will try and give you my most genuine reaction as possible and talk through why I agree or disagree with each one. Please do remember these are unpopular opinions, so you may not like them. Please try to be kind and polite in the comments, but do share your thoughts on all of these takes. So first up we have Priory of the Orange Tree is overrated. Agreed. So I actually DNF'd Priory of the Orange Tree, and it's because it was so overhyped, it was so boring. If you didn't know, Priory of the Orange Tree is this big chunky fantasy book that's probably about 900-ish pages long, and a big part of its marketing was that it was such a huge book, and it really was. It was such a doorstop of a book. And the author repeatedly says, oh, it's actually 3 books in a trench coat. If you're saying that about your book, that means it should have been 3 books. Just saying. But I found in the 250 pages that I read, which is a lot, that's like nearly a whole book in some other books, and I found that it was just dry, it was boring, nothing was happening, the characters were just boring, they weren't doing anything, they weren't growing, it was just nothing. And so yeah, I think it is hugely overhyped. I'm not a fan of Samantha Shannon anyway. I also DNF'd the Bone season, but I do feel like people act as though Priory of the Orange Tree is this huge amazing book and this game changer. I think people were trying to make out like it was going to change the face of fantasy, and it didn't. It was just another too long fantasy book. Next we have the exclusivity of book boxes and special editions is as toxic as ARC culture sometimes. I would say I do think that book boxes and special editions are problematic, and I would say certain parts of ARC culture are problematic, but I wouldn't say it's the exclusivity of book boxes that I have an issue with. So I'd actually really like to hear from people who agree with this why you think book boxes being exclusive and special editions being exclusive is an issue. Because I'd love to know, because I personally don't think that is true. I think there's lots of things in the world that are exclusive and limited, and I don't mind that book boxes and special editions are, and also it's important to remember that they don't really have a choice in the matter. What frustrates me is that people don't seem to accept that, or know perhaps, that the book boxes themselves don't get to choose how many books get printed per print run, and so that's why some special edition runs are a lot more limited than others, and that's why they sell out. The book boxes can't help it. And I think exclusivity helps because it adds a little bit of extra thing of like, I have one of 500 books. It's part of the deal. You're paying extra to have this exclusive book. I don't have an issue with that. I think what I have an issue with is the overconsumption and the dwindling quality. So I think book boxes themselves, when they're not book only, I think you just get so much stuff that you will never use. It's why I cancelled my book boxes back in the day before some of them did book only, because I just didn't need all of this tat that you get in book boxes. I don't need more mugs, more pens, more notebooks. And they come in so much extra packaging that you don't need and all this kind of stuff. Back in the day, everything you used to get in a book box would become wrapped in plastic. Not anymore, but they used to. And it just was not great, and I think that is my issue with book boxes is that kind of overconsumption, and there's just so many special editions now that it's just overwhelming and you get special edition fatigue. But I don't think the exclusivity is the problem for me. So if you do think the exclusivity is a problem, I'd love to hear why in the comments, so open my eyes a little bit if you can. Next we need more normalised polyrep, especially in contemporary. Couldn't agree more. This is definitely a really good one, and I'm kind of sad that it's an unpopular opinion. My thing is, I have read some polyrep in romances, and it's almost always thruples, and it's almost always very sexualized and very much focused on the sexual aspect of being in a poly relationship, and I'd love to see more outside of that. And I think a big way of us getting that is having it outside of romance and having it in contemporary fiction. I think this kind of rep often starts out in romance. I think we saw a lot of queer romance before we saw queer rep in other genres, and the same with, say, autism rep. We saw a lot more of it in romance before it expanded out to other genres, and it still hasn't reached some genres. So I do think it's good to see it, but it needs to be more varied, because like I said, I see a lot of thruples. I don't see a lot of like ethical non-monogamy and people having multiple partners that don't all interact in one kind of closed group. So I do agree, it definitely needs to be more normalised and be more rap in general. Pop culture references are fine in books if they are not used too much. This one I'm kind of on the fence about. I don't like pop culture references, and I think they really date books. I think if you're not reading a book right when it comes out and it has pop culture references in, it can really take you out of the book, and it can really date a book very much. I think this is becoming more of an issue these days with how fast pop culture becomes dated in the age of social media, and especially the age of TikTok. I think the problem is, say you're writing a book now in 2024, if you were to go the traditional publishing route, it wouldn't probably be published until 2025, 2026 maybe. Could even be later than that. And so a pop culture reference you are making now in 2024 is not going to be particularly relevant in a couple of years' time, and that's really tricky to do. Do you keep updating it through the editorial process? At what point can you no longer update that pop culture reference? Is it worth it? And that's what I think is the issue, is I think most of the time the pop culture reference doesn't add enough to make it worth how much it dates a book. I have read books in the past that were written, say, in the early 2000s or early 2010s, and they make pop culture references that I don't understand. And I find even if I do understand a pop culture reference, it takes me out of the story. It makes it feel too real, and I'm there for some escapism. I do think they're not too bad if it's only occasionally, but yeah, if a book uses it too much, it is bad. So maybe they are okay if it's only occasionally, but it's definitely an unpopular opinion. Next one is, I find silent reviews frustrating. This is interesting because it is definitely a trend, so definitely an unpopular opinion. I think, as an autistic person, I struggle with silent reviews because they rely a lot on facial expressions and I can't read those, so I do struggle with them, and I do kind of watch them, and sometimes I'm watching them thinking, well, I think that means they liked the book, but I can't really tell. And so, yeah, I guess sometimes I do find them frustrating, so I do kind of agree, but I guess this trend just isn't for me. I think that's the thing that is kind of important to remember, is like not every trend is for everybody, and so just because I don't understand it and I find it frustrating doesn't mean I want people to not do it. And that's not what this person's saying. They're not saying they wanted it to stop, they just said they'd find it frustrating. And so yeah, I kind of agree, although I feel like I could do it and do my own silent reviews. I just don't know if neurotypical people would be able to then read it. I don't know if I would do the appropriate facial expressions. I don't know. So yeah, I think it is a trend, so it is a popular thing, but yeah, I do find them difficult as a neurodiverse person. Next one is, I don't like having physical copies of books. Interesting. Definitely an unpopular opinion online, because, I mean, clearly I do like having physical copies of books, but I do sort of agree with this one, especially now that I am kind of coming to terms with the overconsumption of books, how much books cost, how much I'm spending on books. Yeah, I kind of agree. I do like having them to an extent, but I don't feel the need to have a physical copy of every book anymore. I try to borrow from the library as much as I can. I try to find stuff on Depop, Vinted, eBay, and all of those kind of things before I buy my own new copy of a book. But I would say I'm not as hung up anymore on owning physical copies of books, and sometimes when you don't love a book, you don't want to keep the copy. At least I don't keep them if I don't love them. It becomes a pain of getting rid of the book. Getting rid of the book becomes an issue to deal with. So it's, yeah, I kind of agree, but I wouldn't say I don't like it. I would say I'm kind of neutral, is what I'm trying to say. Next is, Pride and Prejudice is my least favourite Austen book. This one is tricky for me to react to completely because I have only ever tried to read Pride and Prejudice, I think. I don't think I've read any other Austen books, and I did DNF it. But I would say this is something that I have found a lot of people saying to me when I said I DNF'd Pride and Prejudice. A lot of people told me when I was trying to read it that it wasn't a good start for Austen, and that a better place to start on Austen books was Sense and Sensibility, I think. And I do wonder if a lot of the popularity for Pride and Prejudice comes from the adaptations that people love so much, and would the books be so popular without that? So yeah, I don't know, definitely a hot take though. The next one is French flaps serve no other purpose than to annoy us. I don't think this is a unpopular opinion. I don't think I know anybody that likes French flaps. So if you didn't know, French flaps is when sort of the inside of a cover has an extra bit of cover that flaps out. I'll see if I have one on my shelves. So demonstration of French flaps is this. I have to agree. I don't think this is an unpopular opinion. I don't know anyone that likes them. They're very frustrating. They get caught on things. They make it more difficult to read the book, and I don't really understand the purpose of it. I guess sometimes it's because when you open it, the cover design kind of continues through with the French flap, but other than that, I don't really see the appeal. I don't really see the point. So yeah, I have to agree, they are definitely annoying. The next one is an interesting one. BookTok's impact hasn't been all positive. It's hard to tell what's good versus popular now. I agree. Although I would say, I think most people wouldn't say that BookTok has been completely positive, other than maybe BookTokers themselves. I think as someone who has been around on book internet for about 7 years now, maybe longer, it is tricky, and I think BookTok is having a big impact, and I don't like the impact that it's having, to be honest with you. I also don't like that BookTok is very kind of self-obsessed. I'm not saying any individual is, but I feel like other forms of bookish content creation often honours and uplifts other kinds. So I don't ever really see, back in the day, I wouldn't have seen book bloggers say that book bloggers solely were the reason why a book got popular. It would be kind of like the bookish internet made a book popular, combined with book bloggers, book Twitter, book Instagram, all that kind of stuff, and booktubers would all kind of be collectively given the credit. Whereas these days, it's kind of said as, oh, BookTok made this popular. And I don't like that, because they've claimed that about books that were already popular, like Six of Crows and Red, White and Royal Blue. So I do think there is this kind of insular nature of BookTok. And of course we've had this drama before with certain popular BookTokers claiming that other kinds of bookish content creation are dead. And that's not true. And it's not fair. I think the good versus popular thing is very valid as well, because TikTok is all about grabbing people's attention now and getting it as quickly as possible, delivering it as shortly as possible. Whereas previously, I think it was a case of you had to read someone's review on a book blog, or you had to read someone's review on Bookstagram, or you'd have to watch someone's review or wrap-up video on BookTube, and people would talk about books more in depth. You'd find out what the book was about and what people liked and disliked about a book before you picked it up. Whereas these days, you don't do that on BookTok. On BookTok, you grab people with a splashy quote or really catchy headlines, or, I don't know, the tropes in a book. And that is how you grab people's attention, and that is how you influence people to read your book. And that is what I find really tricky, because people are using that to then go and buy a book. And so books are becoming bestsellers and becoming very popular based on a singular quote that is circulating. And that doesn't actually mean the book itself is good. People have been drawn in by a quote. And I will admit, this has happened to me. I've seen a quote going around and think, that romance sounds really sweet. And then I pick it up and it's actually really bad, and that quote was the only good bit of writing. So I do agree. I think, unfortunately, the way the TikTok algorithm works is working against good books becoming popular. The next one is, breaking the spines of a book isn't a big deal. Agreed. If it's your book and you want to break a spine, don't care. Don't break the spines of other people's books though, if they have not said that it's okay. And I try to avoid it if it isn't already broken in, say, a library book. But yeah, I would say if it's your own book, who cares? It's your own book. Next one. J.K. Rowling's writing is not good and she copied Lord of the Rings. No. I have to disagree with that one. Is J.K. Rowling's writing problematic? Is there problems in the books? Yes, 100%. Is it bad? I don't think so. And here's my caveat, is I think writing can be problematic but still be good, because I think most books, if you look at them hard enough, you will find something problematic in them, because people are people. Nobody is infallible, nobody can write the perfect book with no problems in it, and everybody has biases that they're unaware of or aware of. So I don't think the books would be as popular as they are if they were poorly written. They just might not be to your taste. Are there problems with her books? Yes. Would I encourage anybody who hasn't read them before to read them? No. But do I think they're poorly written? No. Just because a book has one sex scene doesn't make it a spicy book. I guess it depends on your interpretation of what a spicy book is, and for the most part I would kind of agree with this. I think a book that has a spicy scene in it doesn't make it a spicy book, but it's kind of a mild book. You know, it's kind of medium hot maybe. I think the thing is, people kind of misinterpret spicy books to meaning a book where like the only thing about it is the spicy and the sex scenes. However, I don't think that's what they are. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that there is a need for classifying spicy books and non-spicy books for certain people to read. You may have someone who is underage and they have the reading level to read something more intense than YA and read something adult, but you don't want to give them something with sex scenes in it because you feel it's inappropriate. And so, yeah, you are trying to avoid spicy books then, but I agree. I think the current classification in social media terms of a spicy book is a book where everything is about the sex, and one sex scene does not make a book spicy. So yeah, I kind of agree. Next one. I don't like dust jackets. I prefer covers to be printed directly onto the book. Kind of agree. I think sometimes it's nice having a pretty dust jacket and then pretty underneath, but for the most part I do kind of wish I could just have pretty foiled hardbacks. So yeah, I do agree on that one. I think they get damaged super easily. They often have to be taken off when you're reading. So yeah, I kind of agree with that one. Next one. Just because a book was written a long time ago and is a classic doesn't mean I have to like or read it. Yeah, I am a big classics hater. I think that a lot of them are outdated, a lot of them have language that's really inaccessible these days, especially with people who have struggles with processing like me, and nobody has to read them. I find this elitism around classics and like you have to read the classics is really problematic, and especially when people insist that if a book is inspired by or based on a classic, you should read that classic before you read the book. No. It's all about what you want to read at the end of the day, and I do kind of struggle with this thing where classics are put on such a pedestal. A book can still be very good even if not much happens and it's all just characters and vibes. Could not agree more. I know a lot of people struggle with character-driven books, but yes, I agree, a book doesn't have to have a lot of plot. Some of my favourite books are The Wayfarers and the Monk and Robot books by Becky Chambers, which are all very kind of plotless books about characters, and they are fantastic. They are amazing. I think what the difference is, an author has to intend for it to be a book with not a lot of plot and to really do a lot of character work for it to work. I think if a book was supposed to rely on the plot and the plot didn't pull through, it's a bad book. But if a book was supposed to be about the characters and not much plot and they work really hard on those characters, it can come out amazing, like Wayfarers. And I equally think that if you're going to make a character-driven book and your characters aren't that great or you don't do a lot of character work, it's a bad book. Next one is, most fantasy sex scenes are bad and over the top. I can't say I have read many fantasy sex scenes, but I would kind of disagree. I think a lot of sex scenes in romance and all genres and subgenres of romance can be over the top and poorly written. I think it takes a kind of skill to write good ones. From what I've seen, I've not seen any kind of specialness about fantasy sex scenes being particularly over the top or ridiculous. But maybe I just haven't read enough of them. Similar topic. Romantasy didn't need its own genre. Yes, you are so correct. I hate that romantasy is the current trend and that it's its own genre and its own thing. And I also hate that it's called romantasy. It is not. It is fantasy romance. It is not romantasy. No. I hate that. I hate that word because it others it. And the thing is, there's so many other subgenres of romance, like romantic suspense and mafia romance and that kind of stuff. And they are all subgenres of romance, as is fantasy romance. And I think the big problem with having romantasy as its own genre means a lot of books are getting miscategorised as romantasy. I will die on the hill that Fourth Wing is not a romantasy or a fantasy romance. It just isn't. A fantasy romance is a book where it is a fantasy book, but the main plot of the book is the romance. A fantasy book with a lot of romance, a lot of sex scenes, is not a romantasy. It just isn't. I would say Divine Rivals, romantasy, because it is a fantasy book where the main plot is the romance. I can't think of any others because I don't like romantasy or fantasy romance. I find it really boring. But that's just my own thing. I'm not saying it shouldn't exist, I'm just saying I don't like it. But there's so many other books, like people say that A Court of Thorns and Roses is romantasy. No, it is not. It is a fantasy with a strong romance line, but the main plot is not about the romance. Like, it's how, I think if we'd followed the romantasy categorisation, pretty much every contemporary book would be considered a contemporary romance. Because a lot of them have a romance in them. And a lot of contemporary books have sex scenes. Doesn't make them romance books. It makes them contemporaries with a romance. There's a difference. It's about what the focus of the book is. So yes, I do completely agree with this. Romantasy is a subgenre. It is not its own genre. And it's just a trend. I'm looking forward to this trend fading away because it's one of my least favourite, or if not my least favourite subgenre of romance. And I think a lot of people are just jumping on the bandwagon, and I think a lot of books are getting mislabelled as romantasy, and I'm not here for it. I'm just not. I also think the misclassification of certain books like ACOTAR and Fourth Wing as romantasy really does a disservice to true romantasy writers whose entire books are fantasy books focused on the romance. I am so tired of autism and ADHD being the only neurodiversity rep we get. I really hate this one. Because why have you got to tear down autism and ADHD to say that others need more rep? Why do autism and ADHD have to come into this at all? Why can't you just say, I wish we had more of this rep? Because I also disagree with the statement as a whole. I would say we get barely any autism rep. We get a little bit more ADHD rep than autism, but not a lot. There's not a lot of autism or ADHD rep out there, so I don't know what you're talking about. And I think other neurodiversities are much more represented. I have read so many more books with dyslexia rep than autism and ADHD. That is a neurodiversity. I don't like it. I really don't like it. I think it comes back to, like, when people were saying we needed more disability rep in books, some people were framing it as, I find it really frustrating that we get all of this POC rep and LGBT rep but no disability rep. And it's like, why do those things existing matter to the disability rep? That is not relevant. It's you want more neurodiversity rep, you want more disabled rep. Don't tear other things down to try and bring something else up. I don't like that at all. And I think we don't have enough autism and ADHD rep, and it's not the only neurodiversity rep we get, as I've already said. So I think just it's probably more popular right now. There's a couple of popular authors writing autism and ADHD rep, but there's a lot of other rep out there. You just kind of have to know about it. You have to look for it. And we don't have enough autism rep, we don't have enough ADHD rep, we don't have enough disability rep as a whole. And so I think the framing of this is what really upset me, because it implies that we have enough autism and ADHD when we don't. And I'd rather say, I'd like to see more of this rep, or I'd like to see more of this rep, than we have too much of another rep. Okay, I've got two written down the same thing because they were basically saying the same thing. The first one is The Hating Game is super problematic as a romance and insufferable, and the other one was The Hating Game was a super creepy romance. Agreed. I DNF'd The Hating Game because it was so problematic and creepy. So yeah, I find it a bit of a red flag when people tell me they loved it. It was incredibly fatphobic from the offset, and from what I've seen of clips and stuff I've read, it got worse, and there were other problematic elements, and it was really creepy. So yeah, definitely true. There's way more, like, way better romances out there that you could read. The next one is, people asking if every single book is spicy is so annoying. I think I don't agree, because it depends on the motivation and the implication behind it. So I think there are certain cases where it is important to ask these things, because it might be a case of you need to avoid sex scenes for religious reasons, because of someone's age or vulnerabilities. So it is important to know if a book is spicy or not. But I do think a lot of people out there are asking if a book is spicy or not purely because they just want to read spicy books, and that is really frustrating, especially when they're asking it about, say, young adult books, when a lot of people feel like young adult books shouldn't be spicy, or if there are sex scenes in young adult books, they shouldn't be in the spicy kind. So yeah, I get where this person is coming from, but I don't think it's as black and white as that. And the final one, I think it's super corny when authors rebrand magic with weird spelling to make it sound cooler. I kind of agree with that one. Like, when they spell magic with like a Y and a CK, it does make me cringe. Like, it doesn't make it any more fantasy or any weirder. And like, I find it really cringe when they take a normal name and make it fantasy by spelling it weird. So yeah, I kind of agree. It's a bit try hard, and it's very naughty's fantasy to do that. It's not as common these days, I think. So those were your unpopular bookish opinions. Hopefully I haven't upset anybody in the comments below, but please do let me know your thoughts, and remember to stay polite and stay kind. And yeah, if you have any thoughts on these, please share them, and if you have any unpopular bookish opinions, feel free to put them below, and just be warned, people might not like them. So thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to see more content from me. All of my social media links are in the description below. If you'd like to leave me a comment to let me know that you are here, leave me a camera emoji in the comments below. Thank you again. Bye!